The cruelest curse was never death. It was waking up beside the love of your life and seeing only a stranger. The first rays of dawn spilled through the towering windows of Black Hollow Castle, painting ribbons of pale gold across the polished stone floor. Outside, the kingdom stirred beneath a silver mist that drifted through ancient pine forests, while the castle bells echoed over the valley to welcome the anniversary of Alpha King Adrian Ashford's reign. Servants hurried through quiet corridors carrying fresh flowers, polished silver, and banners embroidered with the royal wolf, believing this would become another day remembered in the history of the Northern Territories. None of them knew that before the morning ended, history itself would lose its king. Clara Whitmore stood quietly beside the massive bedroom window, her fingers wrapped around a warm porcelain cup as she watched sunlight chase away the night. She smiled to herself when she heard Adrian breathe more deeply behind her. For the first time in weeks, he had slept peacefully. The burden of leading every pack under one banner had carved invisible lines across his face. Yet in sleep he looked younger, almost like the fearless man she had met years before beneath an old cedar tree. She crossed the room with gentle steps, brushing a loose strand of dark hair away from his forehead. His skin felt warm beneath her fingertips. "Good morning," she whispered with the familiar tenderness that had become as natural as breathing. Adrian's silver eyes opened slowly. For one quiet heartbeat, everything seemed unchanged. Then his expression emptied. His gaze settled on Clara without warmth, without recognition, without even curiosity. It was the look a king reserved for an unexpected visitor. He immediately sat upright, instinct replacing comfort as his voice turned calm, steady, and distant. "Who are you?" The question struck harder than any winter wind. Clara blinked, believing he was teasing her after too many sleepless nights. She gave a soft laugh that faded almost instantly. "Adrian, it's me." His eyes narrowed ever so slightly. "How did you enter my private chamber?" The porcelain cup slipped from Clara's trembling hands, shattering softly across the marble floor as warm tea spread around her shoes. The sound drew two royal guards who rushed through the doors, only to freeze when they found the Alpha King staring at the woman everyone in the kingdom knew as his Luna. Neither guard spoke. Fear settled silently across the room because both men recognized something was terribly wrong. Adrian never looked away from Clara. His instincts should have warned him if she were dangerous, yet they remained strangely quiet. Even more unsettling, his heartbeat refused to quicken with suspicion. Instead, an unfamiliar ache tightened somewhere deep inside his chest, a feeling so faint it vanished before he could grasp it. He searched her face for recognition and found only emptiness. Clara could hardly breathe. The man who had once crossed battlefields just to return home before sunset now looked at her as though they had never shared a single sunrise. Before anyone could explain, a cold breeze swept through the room, although every window remained closed. The candles flickered. A faint silver symbol briefly shimmered across Adrian's wrist before disappearing beneath his skin. Hidden somewhere beyond the castle walls, an ancient voice whispered through the morning air, unheard by everyone except fate itself. The curse had awakened. Before the next full moon, the Alpha King would forget every soul he had ever loved, and the woman standing only a few feet away would become the first memory stolen forever. The castle remained unusually quiet long after the shattered porcelain had been swept away, as though even the ancient stone walls were waiting for someone to explain what no one could understand. Clara stood outside the royal chamber, while the heavy oak doors remained closed before her. Through the carved panels, she could hear unfamiliar voices, advisors speaking carefully, physicians offering impossible explanations, and Adrian asking the same question over and over again. Who was the woman they insisted he had loved for years? Every answer sounded unbelievable to him. Every memory they described felt like someone else's life. The royal physician finally emerged with weary eyes and folded hands. He had served 3 generations of Alpha Kings, yet he had never witnessed anything like this. His voice barely rose above a whisper. His Majesty remembers every battle. He remembers every treaty. He remembers every law he has ever signed. But every face connected to love has vanished. Clara felt the words settle into her heart with quiet dread. "Can he remember his parents?" she asked. The physician slowly shook his head. "Only their titles. His childhood friends?" Another silent shake. "Me?" The old man could not bring himself to answer. He simply lowered his eyes, and that silence became heavier than any spoken truth. Hours passed before Adrian finally requested fresh air. Surrounded by 2 guards, he crossed the castle gardens where blooming white roses lined winding stone paths. Servants bowed respectfully as he passed, but Adrian found himself studying every face with quiet uncertainty. Some smiled at him with affection. Others looked frightened. He recognized none of the emotions directed toward him because he could not remember earning them. Clara followed several steps behind, careful not to intrude. She knew every corner of these gardens. They had planted the tallest cedar together after their first winter as husband and wife. They had laughed beneath its branches during summer rainstorms. They had watched countless sunsets from the marble overlook beyond the fountain. To Adrian, it was only another beautiful garden. He paused unexpectedly beside the old cedar tree. His fingers brushed against its rough bark without thinking. A strange feeling passed through him. Warmth. Comfort. A memory almost reached the surface before dissolving like morning fog. He frowned. Have I stood here before? One of the guards answered carefully. Many times, Your Majesty. Adrian looked toward the tree again, unsettled by the unfamiliar ache pressing against his chest. It feels important. Clara almost stepped forward before stopping herself. If she spoke too quickly, she feared she would only become another stranger insisting upon a story he could not believe. Instead, she watched silently as a single cedar needle drifted onto Adrian's shoulder. Without hesitation, his hand lifted and brushed another invisible needle from Clara's sleeve before he even realized what he had done. They both froze. Adrian stared at his own hand. Why did I do that? He murmured. Clara's heart skipped. Because you always. The words caught in her throat. Adrian looked directly into her eyes again, searching for an answer hidden somewhere beyond memory. For the briefest instant, something softened in his silver gaze. It disappeared as quickly as it came. I am sorry, he said with genuine kindness. Everyone keeps telling me that I should know you. I wish I did. Clara forced a small smile despite the tears threatening to rise. Maybe your heart remembers what your mind cannot. Adrian looked away toward the distant mountains glowing beneath the afternoon sun. He did not understand why those words lingered inside him long after the conversation ended, nor why every instinct urged him not to let the quiet woman walk too far behind him, even though he could not remember ever meeting her before. By the following morning, whispers had spread farther than the morning mist rolling across the mountains surrounding Black Hollow. The servants no longer spoke openly in the hallways. Conversations stopped whenever Clara entered a room, and worried eyes followed every step she took through the castle. News traveled quickly among the northern packs, but fear always traveled faster. Before noon, the royal council gathered inside the ancient Hall of Wolves, where towering stone pillars supported a ceiling painted with the victories of generations past. Alpha King Adrian Ashford entered wearing his black ceremonial coat, every movement calm and composed, giving no outward sign that anything was wrong. Yet those who had known him for years noticed the difference immediately. His smile no longer reached his eyes. The warmth that once filled the room whenever he arrived had quietly disappeared. Clara remained near the rear of the chamber, hoping only to observe without adding to Adrian's confusion. Lord Victor Hawthorne, the oldest member of the council, stepped forward with measured confidence. His silver beard and polished cane reflected decades of political influence. He bowed respectfully before addressing the king. Your Majesty, the neighboring packs await your decision regarding the Spring Alliance gathering. Adrian nodded thoughtfully. Remind me which leaders attended last year. A heavy silence settled across the chamber. Every advisor exchanged uncertain glances because Adrian himself had personally hosted the gathering only 12 months earlier. He had welcomed every alpha by name. Now he remembered none of them. Lord Hawthorne carefully answered each question without revealing his growing concern. Every response confirmed what everyone feared. Adrian's memories of duty remained untouched, but every relationship had become a blank page. While the meeting continued, Clara noticed another change. Several council members avoided looking toward her altogether, while others watched her with quiet suspicion. They had already begun searching for someone to blame. After the meeting ended, Clara stepped into the library, hoping to find ancient records about forgotten magic. Dust floated through beams of afternoon sunlight as thousands of leather-bound books rested silently upon towering shelves. She searched every volume mentioning moon curses, memory enchantments, or forgotten kings, but none described a curse quite like this one. Hours passed before soft footsteps echoed behind her. She turned to find Adrian standing alone in the doorway. He looked almost embarrassed. "I hope I am not interrupting." Clara gently closed the old book in her hands. "Not at all." Adrian walked slowly through the quiet room, running his fingertips across the shelves as though searching for something invisible. "Everyone keeps expecting me to recognize you. I have been trying to understand why." Clara remained silent, allowing him to continue. "When I entered this room, I knew exactly where every history book should be." He smiled faintly. "Yet I also knew that I would find you here." "That makes no sense." Clara felt hope flicker inside her. Maybe some memories do not begin in the mind. Adrian looked at her thoughtfully. "Tell me something honestly." She nodded. "Was I a good man before this happened?" The question caught her completely unprepared. She remembered countless moments that answered it. The king who stopped his horse to help an elderly traveler. The husband who spent evenings planting cedar trees because she once mentioned loving their scent. The leader who listened before giving judgment. None of those memories belonged to him anymore. Clara answered with quiet certainty. "You chose kindness whenever power offered an easier path." Adrian lowered his eyes, absorbing every word. Before he could respond, the library doors opened once again. Lord Hawthorne entered carrying a sealed scroll, his expression carefully composed. "Your Majesty, representatives from the Eastern Ridge Pack have arrived earlier than expected." His gaze shifted briefly toward Clara before returning to the king. "Perhaps it would be wise if unnecessary visitors remained away from official discussions until we understand the nature of this unusual situation." The meaning behind his words needed no explanation. Clara was no longer being treated as the Queen of Black Hollow. She was becoming an outsider inside her own home, and somewhere deep within the castle, unseen by every living soul, the ancient curse quietly prepared to steal another piece of the king's forgotten heart. That evening, rain drifted gently across Black Hollow Castle, covering the towering walls in a curtain of silver that blurred the distant mountains into shadows. Inside the royal residence, every corridor glowed beneath rows of warm lanterns, but the comforting light could not ease the quiet uneasiness settling over everyone who lived there. Adrian dismissed his attendants earlier than usual. He told himself he wanted silence, yet the moment the chamber doors closed behind him, the silence became unbearable. He walked slowly toward the fireplace where an old portrait rested above the carved stone mantel. It showed himself standing beside a smiling woman beneath the blooming cedar tree in the royal gardens. He recognized his own face immediately. The woman beside him remained a stranger. He stared at the painting for several long moments before lifting it from the mantel. Someone had painted every detail with extraordinary care. Their hands nearly touched. Their smiles carried a peace that could not be faked. He should have remembered standing there. Instead, he felt only frustration. A quiet knock interrupted his thoughts. Clara entered carrying a wooden tray with fresh tea exactly the way she had done countless evenings before. She hesitated near the doorway, uncertain whether she still belonged inside the room that had once been their shared sanctuary. Adrian looked from the portrait to Clara, then back again. "Everyone says this is you." Clara nodded softly. "It is." He placed the painting carefully onto the table between them. "Tell me about that day." She looked at the portrait with gentle sadness. "You planted the cedar after the longest winter the kingdom had seen in decades. You said that if people could watch something grow together, they would remember that hope always returns." Adrian listened without interrupting. The story sounded beautiful. It also sounded impossible to imagine coming from someone he could not remember being. Clara smiled faintly as another memory surfaced. "You insisted on digging the hole yourself, even though every guard offered to help. By the end, your boots were covered in mud, and you laughed because you said a king should never be afraid of dirty hands." Adrian closed his eyes for just a moment. Suddenly he heard laughter. His own laughter. Warm sunlight filtering through cedar branches. A woman's voice calling his name. The vision arrived so quickly that it vanished before he could reach it. He opened his eyes, breathing a little faster than before. "I almost saw something." Clara's heart lifted. "What was it?" He slowly shook his head. Only light. And happiness. Before either of them could speak again, a sharp pain pulsed behind Adrian's eyes. He pressed his hand against his temple as the room seemed to blur around him. The portrait slipped from the edge of the table and landed softly on the rug. At that exact moment, another memory disappeared without either of them realizing it. Somewhere else inside the castle, Adrian's childhood tutor approached him in the hallway with a welcoming smile. Adrian greeted the elderly man politely, but introduced himself as though they had never met before. The tutor quietly lowered his eyes, understanding that he too had been erased. Back inside the chamber, Adrian slowly recovered, unaware that the curse had claimed another piece of his past. Clara picked up the fallen portrait and carefully returned it to the mantel. She refused to let hope disappear as easily as memory had. Looking toward Adrian, she noticed something resting beside the fireplace that had not been there earlier. It was a weathered leather journal tied with a faded blue ribbon. Confused, she reached for it and gently opened the first page. Written in Adrian's unmistakable handwriting were the words, "If the day ever comes when I cannot remember you, this book will remember for me." Clara's breath caught as she turned toward Adrian, but his puzzled expression revealed one heartbreaking truth. He had no memory of ever writing those words. Clara carried the weathered journal to the small reading room overlooking the eastern cliffs, where dawn usually painted the sky with shades of gold and pale blue. Tonight, only moonlight spilled through the tall windows, leaving the pages glowing softly beneath the flickering light of a single candle. Adrian sat across from her in complete silence, watching as she untied the faded blue ribbon with careful hands. He did not remember writing the journal, yet something inside him urged him to keep reading. The first pages contained ordinary memories. Their first walk through the cedar forest, their favorite corner of the castle library, the tiny white wildflowers Clara always gathered each spring because they reminded her that fragile things could survive harsh winters. Every sentence carried warmth, humor, and quiet devotion. Adrian listened as though hearing the story of another man's life. He admired the person described within those pages, but he could not feel connected to him. Then Clara turned another page, and both of them froze. The handwriting became hurried, as though written during a sleepless night. "If you are reading this and cannot remember me, then the warning came too late." The old woman beneath Moonfall Ridge was right. She said there are curses that steal love one memory at a time until the heart itself forgets why it ever learned to hope. I did not believe her. I should have listened. Adrian slowly leaned forward. Moonfall Ridge. Clara searched her own memory. We have never been there together. Adrian frowned. Then why would I write this? Clara continued reading. She found another passage written several pages later. If the curse awakens, do not search inside the castle. The answers were hidden long before the crown belonged to me. Find the keeper beneath Moonfall Ridge before the final memory disappears. After that, no ordinary magic can restore what has been lost. A heavy silence settled between them. Adrian looked toward the rain beyond the windows, feeling that strange ache return inside his chest. I trusted whoever this keeper is enough to leave instructions for myself. Clara gently closed the journal. Then we have somewhere to begin. Before Adrian could answer, hurried footsteps echoed outside the chamber. The royal physician entered, breathing harder than usual. His expression alone told them something had changed again. "Your Majesty," he said quietly, "I tested your memory once more." Adrian stood immediately, and the physician hesitated before speaking. "You no longer remember the names of the captains who trained beside you during your first years as king. Yesterday you recalled every one of them." Adrian closed his eyes. Another piece had vanished without warning. He had not even noticed it disappearing. The physician continued with visible concern. "The intervals are becoming shorter." Clara instinctively reached toward Adrian before stopping herself, uncertain whether the gesture would comfort or confuse him. Adrian noticed the movement anyway. For reasons he could not explain, seeing her pull her hand back hurt more than hearing about another lost memory. He looked at her for a long moment before quietly speaking. "If this journal belongs to me, then the man who wrote it believed you would never give up." Clara met his silver eyes with steady determination. He was right. Adrian nodded slowly. "Then neither will I." Outside, the rain finally stopped, revealing a bright full moon hanging above the northern mountains. Far beyond the kingdom, hidden beneath towering cliffs and ancient cedar forests untouched by time. An elderly woman opened her eyes inside a lonely stone sanctuary. Without seeing the castle, she whispered into the quiet night, "The journal has been found." She looked toward the glowing moon with sadness that came from knowing far more than she wished. Now they must decide what they are willing to lose, because every memory the king regains will demand another memory in return. Even destiny cannot escape the price of remembrance. Before sunrise painted the peaks beyond Black Hollow, Adrian and Clara quietly departed the castle through the eastern gate, with only the royal physician and 2 trusted guards aware of their destination. The fewer people who knew about Moonfall Ridge, the safer the journey would remain. A cool breeze carried the scent of pine and damp earth as their horses followed an old trail that had nearly disappeared beneath decades of fallen leaves. The farther they traveled from the kingdom, the quieter the world became. Even the birds seemed reluctant to sing beneath the towering cedars that covered the mountainside. Adrian rode beside Clara without speaking for nearly an hour. The silence between them no longer felt uncomfortable. It carried the strange familiarity of 2 souls walking toward an answer neither fully understood. Occasionally, he glanced toward her, noticing the calm determination in her expression. Although his memories remained lost, he found himself trusting her without needing a reason. As the morning sun climbed higher, the trail narrowed until the horses could travel no farther. They continued on foot, climbing weathered stone steps carved into the mountain centuries earlier. Moss covered every surface, and crystal streams flowed quietly beside the path. At last they reached a circular clearing hidden beneath enormous cedar branches where a small stone sanctuary rested against the cliff face. It appeared untouched by time itself. Wildflowers bloomed around its entrance despite the cool mountain air, and dozens of tiny wind chimes crafted from polished shells swayed gently, although almost no breeze reached the clearing. Before either of them could knock, the wooden door slowly opened. An elderly woman with silver hair and kind gray eyes stepped outside, as though she had been expecting them for years. She smiled softly when her gaze settled upon Adrian. "You remembered the path, even if you forgot why you needed it." Adrian looked surprised. "Have we met before?" The woman nodded with quiet sadness. "Many times. Only you cannot carry those meetings with you anymore." Clara stepped forward. "Are you the keeper?" "That is simply the name others gave me," the woman replied. "My own name was Evelyn long before anyone sought my guidance." She invited them inside the sanctuary where shelves filled with ancient journals surrounded a single round table carved from white stone. Sunlight entered through an opening above, filling the room with peaceful warmth. Evelyn gently placed Adrian's weathered journal beside several older volumes that looked remarkably similar. "Every Alpha King who feared forgetting love eventually found this place," she said. Adrian looked toward the collection with growing concern. "Then this curse has happened before." Evelyn slowly nodded. "Not often, but enough that I began preserving their stories before memory erased them." Clara leaned forward. "Can it be broken?" The keeper remained silent for several moments before answering. "Yes." Hope immediately filled Clara's eyes, but Evelyn's expression did not change. "Every curse demands balance. This one feeds upon cherished memories because love is stronger than ordinary magic. Recovering what has been stolen requires another treasured memory to take its place." Adrian frowned. "Mine." Evelyn looked gently toward Clara instead. "Not yours. Hers." The room became completely still. Clara searched the keeper's face, hoping she had misunderstood. Evelyn continued quietly. "Every memory the king recovers will be carried away from the one who loves him most. If he remembers your first meeting, you will forget it. If he remembers your wedding day, it will vanish from your heart forever. The curse does not destroy love. It simply refuses to allow both souls to remember it at the same time." Adrian immediately shook his head. "Then I will remain as I am." Clara turned toward him with tears quietly gathering in her eyes. "You cannot lead a kingdom while losing yourself." Adrian answered without hesitation. "And I cannot ask you to lose yourself so that I may find mine." Evelyn gently opened the old journal to its final unwritten page. As the sunlight touched the paper, faint words slowly appeared across the empty parchment in Adrian's own handwriting, written long before this day had arrived. "If you have reached the keeper, then the choice is no longer whether memory is worth saving. The choice is whether love can survive after memory is gone. The mountain sanctuary remained silent long after Evelyn's final words faded into the warm afternoon air. Even the wind chimes outside seemed to rest, as though the ancient mountain itself understood the weight of the choice now resting before them. Adrian stood motionless beside the stone table, unable to look away from the final page of the journal. Every instinct urged him to reject the sacrifice. Every duty he carried as king demanded the opposite. Clara slowly closed the journal, her fingertips lingering on its worn leather cover. She remembered the countless evenings Adrian had disappeared into his study, claiming he needed to finish royal documents. Now she understood he had been preparing for this day, writing letters to a future version of himself who might no longer remember why he loved the woman waiting outside those doors. A quiet sadness settled over her, but beneath it something stronger quietly grew. Acceptance. Evelyn stepped toward the center of the room and gently placed both hands upon the ancient white stone table. Delicate silver markings hidden beneath its surface began glowing like moonlight reflected across still water. The first memory must always be chosen willingly, she explained. No one may decide for another. Adrian answered immediately. Then I refuse. Clara looked at him with the same gentle smile that had once steadied him before difficult battles. You always make decisions with your heart before your crown. Adrian shook his head. Not this time. She stepped closer until only a few feet separated them. Although he no longer remembered loving her, standing near her still filled him with the strange peace he had felt since the first morning he forgot her name. Listen to me, Clara said softly. If your memories continue disappearing, Black Hollow will lose more than a king. It will lose the man who taught every pack that kindness could be stronger than fear. Adrian lowered his eyes. And what becomes of you? Clara smiled through tears that never fell. Maybe love was never meant to depend on memory. Evelyn quietly extended her hand toward Clara. Resting upon her open palm lay a small crystal no larger than a robin's egg, glowing with a gentle silver light. Hold this, she whispered. Think only of the memory you are willing to surrender. Clara accepted the crystal with trembling fingers. She closed her eyes. Almost immediately the sanctuary faded away. In its place appeared a bright spring afternoon years earlier beneath the towering cedar tree inside Black Hollow's gardens. She saw a younger Adrian laughing after accidentally covering his boots with mud while planting the tiny cedar sapling. She heard herself teasing him that kings should let gardeners do the hard work. She felt his hand finding hers beneath the warm sunlight as he smiled and answered, If I cannot build tomorrow beside the woman I love, then I have built nothing worth ruling. The memory glowed brighter inside the crystal until it shined like a tiny star. Clara's lips trembled. She whispered one final goodbye to the happiest afternoon of her life. The light gently drifted from the crystal and floated toward Adrian like a beam carried by the wind. The instant it touched his chest, he gasped softly. Images flooded his mind. The cedar tree, warm spring air, Clara's laughter, mud across his boots, their hands meeting beneath golden sunlight. The forgotten joy returned all at once, as vivid as the day it happened. Adrian looked toward Clara with tears filling his silver eyes. I remember, he whispered. I remember everything about that day. Clara smiled instinctively, relieved beyond words. Then confusion slowly replaced her happiness. She looked around the sanctuary, her eyes searching the room. Finally, she turned toward Adrian with quiet uncertainty. Forgive me, she asked gently. Why are you crying? Adrian's heart seemed to stop. The memory had returned exactly as Evelyn promised. So had the price. The happiest day they had ever shared now belonged only to him. Adrian could not speak for several long moments. The joy of remembering their happiest spring afternoon collided with the unbearable truth standing before him. Clara looked at him with gentle concern, completely unaware that the memory shining so brightly inside his heart had already vanished from hers forever. She offered him a reassuring smile, the same smile that had carried him through years of difficult decisions. Yet now she no longer understood why seeing him in pain made her own chest feel unexpectedly heavy. Evelyn quietly closed her eyes, allowing them a few moments of silence before speaking. The bond still lives, she said softly. The memory is gone. The love remains. Adrian finally found his voice. There has to be another way. Evelyn slowly shook her head. The curse was not created to destroy affection. It was created to force impossible choices. Every memory reclaimed restores part of your soul, while asking another soul to carry the cost. Adrian looked toward Clara, determination replacing sorrow. Then I choose to stop here. Clara immediately answered before Evelyn could speak. You cannot. Adrian turned to her. You do not even remember what you have lost. Clara lowered her eyes for only a moment before looking back with quiet confidence. Maybe not. But I remember the kind of man you are becoming every day, even if I cannot remember how we arrived here. Her words settled deeply inside Adrian because they sounded exactly like something the woman in his restored memory would have said. Evelyn stepped toward an ancient stone shelf and carefully removed a small wooden box carved with the image of two wolves facing the moon. She opened it slowly, revealing 7 polished silver stones resting inside. Only one remained untouched. The other 6 had grown dull with age. Adrian studied them with curiosity. What are they? Promises, Evelyn replied. Each belonged to a king who stood where you stand now. Some continued until every memory returned. Others stopped before the final price became too great. Adrian looked at the last untouched stone. What happened to them? Evelyn smiled with quiet sadness. Some found happiness again. Others learned that forgotten love still leaves footprints upon the heart. Clara reached toward the final silver stone without hesitation. The moment her fingertips touched it, a warm pulse spread through the sanctuary. Brief images flashed across the polished surface. A wedding beneath falling cedar leaves. Winter evenings beside the castle fireplace. Quiet conversations under countless stars. Hundreds of ordinary moments that together had built an extraordinary life. Clara stared at the visions with tears quietly filling her eyes. She could not recognize any of them, yet every image felt strangely familiar, like hearing a song she somehow knew without remembering where she first heard it. Adrian gently took the stone from her hand before its light grew brighter. No. His voice remained calm but unwavering. I will not ask you to surrender another piece of your life. Clara looked at him with remarkable peace. You are not asking. She rested her hand over his. I am choosing. Before Adrian could answer, the final silver stone suddenly began glowing on its own. The light spread across the room, weaving gently around the ancient journals before gathering above the white stone table. From within the glow appeared the faint outline of a young man wearing a simple traveler's cloak. Adrian's breath caught immediately because he recognized the face before anyone else did. It was himself, years younger, long before he had worn the crown. The glowing figure smiled directly at him. If you are seeing this, the vision said warmly, then I already knew you would try to protect Clara by refusing the final step. That is exactly why I prepared one last truth you have not remembered yet. The curse was never meant to be broken by memory alone. It can only end when someone chooses love freely, even after every reason to remember it has disappeared. The glowing image of Adrian's younger self slowly faded, but his final words lingered inside the sanctuary like the echo of a forgotten song. Silence settled over the room as the silver light surrounding the ancient table gently dissolved into the morning air. Evelyn smiled for the first time since their arrival. Now you understand, she whispered. The curse was never defeated by magic. It was defeated by choice. Adrian looked at Clara, and for the first time since awakening without his memories, fear no longer guided his heart. He stepped toward her, stopping only when their eyes met. There is something I remember, he said quietly. Not because a memory returned, but because I keep choosing it every single day. Every time I see you, I trust you before I understand why. Every time you smile, something inside me becomes peaceful. Every road I have walked since forgetting has somehow led me back to you. Clara listened carefully. She could no longer remember the cedar tree, the spring afternoon, or countless quiet moments they had once shared, yet his words awakened a warmth that no forgotten memory could erase. She smiled softly. Then perhaps memories introduce people, but love recognizes them. As the final sentence left her lips, the last silver stone resting inside the wooden box dissolved into countless points of light. They floated gently around Adrian and Clara before rising toward the opening above the sanctuary, disappearing into the bright morning sky. At that same moment, The faint silver mark hidden beneath Adrian's wrist quietly vanished. The invisible weight that had followed him for days simply disappeared, leaving behind only calm. Evelyn closed the wooden box and gently placed it back upon the stone shelf. "It is finished," she said. Adrian looked at her with quiet surprise. "Will my memories return completely?" Evelyn slowly shook her head. "Some will. Some will remain where they belong, beyond time. But the curse has ended because both of you proved something stronger than remembrance. You chose one another freely, even when memory could no longer persuade you." Several days later, Black Hollow Castle welcomed its king home beneath clear blue skies and warm spring sunlight. The council immediately noticed the difference. Adrian once again remembered the names of his commanders, his teachers, and the people who had stood beside him throughout his reign. The fear that had clouded the kingdom quietly faded. Yet one mystery remained. Every evening, after completing his royal duties, Adrian walked to the cedar tree overlooking the gardens. Clara often found herself wandering there as well, although she could never explain why that place felt so comforting. One afternoon, she discovered Adrian kneeling beside the now towering cedar, carefully planting a tiny new sapling beside it. She laughed softly. "Do you always plant trees without asking for help?" Adrian looked up with an easy smile. "Apparently I do." Clara stepped beside him and brushed a little soil from his sleeve without thinking. The simple gesture felt strangely familiar to them both. Adrian paused before speaking. "Would you help me finish this?" She nodded without hesitation. Together they pressed the last handful of earth around the young cedar. As they stood, a gentle breeze carried the scent of pine across the gardens. Adrian looked toward Clara with quiet certainty. "There is something I would like to ask you." She tilted her head curiously. "What is it?" He smiled with the peaceful confidence of a man who no longer feared forgetting. "I do not know every chapter of our story anymore, but I would like to spend the rest of my life writing the next ones with you." Clara felt her heart answer before her mind could search for reasons. She slipped her hand into his, and although neither of them remembered every beautiful moment that had brought them there, both of them knew with absolute certainty that they had finally found home again. High above the gardens, sunlight poured through the cedar branches exactly as it had years before, reminding the kingdom that memories may fade, time may change every path, but true love never waits inside the past. It chooses the same heart again and again, every single day.